Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Marie Macaulay from the UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning. Thank you, everyone, for being here today, and welcome today's webinar, which is organized by our UNESCO network of learning cities, but also with the Pascal International Observatory. And today's webinar is on challenges of inclusion in learning cities, building very much on the work from the 4th International Conference on Learning Cities, which took place in the city of Medellin in Colombia in October 2019. This is the first of the GNLC Pascal webinar, and the objective of the new series is very much to highlight important and challenging aspects of learning city development, drawing on the recent research and development work in Pascal and UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning, as well as to demonstrate practical applications of successful approaches in learning cities to address some of the issues that will be the topic of our discussion today. So a little bit of logistics. Today's webinar will last an hour and a half. The webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be available on the UIL YouTube channel. A link to that YouTube page will be uploaded in the chat for you to have. I also invite you to consult some of the different webinars we've been hosting for the past 2 months now as part of the Global Network of Learning Cities webinars. We've had one a week for the past 2 months on many different topics with different cities. All of those are available on the channel. The format for today's webinar is we'll be listening to individual presentations from our speakers today, and that will be followed by a Q&A at the end. I'd like to invite all the participants who are here with us today to very much use the Q&A option you have that appears at the bottom of your screen to ask questions throughout the webinar, either to specific speakers or just to all speakers, more general questions if you have them. If you use the chat, just know that your question might actually get lost in the feed because a lot of people tend to use the chat to communicate with each other. So just invite you to stick to the Q&A for questions. If you're interested in hearing from us after the webinar and to receive to your mailbox some of the content discussed, and also to receive the invitations for following webinars, we invite you to sign up to the UIL newsletter, and that will be provided in the chat for you once again. Note that the audience today is fully muted, so nobody is able to speak directly, so you should be able to only use the chat to converse with each other. And if you have any specific questions, just ask them in the Q&A. And now I'll make a quick announcement just to let everybody know that the period for membership applications to the UNESCO Global Network of Learning Cities has been extended. The deadline is now June 30th, so just another few days. And then national commissions have until July 31st to endorse the procedure once the cities have applied. Relevant information, including some of the application forms, is now being made available to you in the chat. So all the different links should appear in the next little while, and they're appearing now as we speak. So with that, I'd like to just let you know that we'll be hearing today from Mr. Mike Osborne, Professor of Adult and Lifelong Learning, Director of Research, School of Education at the University of Glasgow, also the Director of the Pascal International Observatory, who's co-hosting this webinar series with us. Ms. Alexandra Aguledo Ruiz from the Secretary of Education in the city of Medellin, Colombia. We'll be hearing from Ms. Aminata Diawara, the person responsible for learning cities of the city of Mantes-la-Jolie in France. And we'll be hearing from Melton, Australia, Ms. Cassandra Connolly, who's the Lifelong Learning Projects Officer in Melton. And I'll just also note that the two cities that are joining us today, both from France and from Australia, are also part of the GNLC cluster on equity and inclusion, so very much aware of the different strategies and approaches related to the topic of discussion today. And with that, I'd like to now invite our opening speaker, Mr. Raúl Valdés Cotera from the UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning, and also a person responsible for the GNLC. Raúl, if you're with us and if you can hear us, the floor is yours for opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Marie. Thank you for the introduction, and remind us of what happened 8 months ago in the 4th International Conference on Learning Cities, which took place in October in Medellin. with the topic inclusion, a principle for lifelong learning and sustainable cities. At that time, two main objectives of the conference were developed. One, a better understanding of inclusion as part of lifelong learning and sustainable development, but also the chance of cities to share experiences on the implementation of local actions that support inclusion through lifelong learning and have an impact on vulnerable groups. I need to say that we had an incredible interchange at that time with tangible outcomes, such as the background paper or the Medellin Manifesto, and also a series of articles that will be published very soon, focusing on different vulnerable groups. But also we have an intangible outcomes that are clearly reflected in the very consolidated network that we have already, and this can be reflected in our activities and continued dialogue on equity and inclusion of different groups during pandemic time. On this background basis is that we would like to start this series of webinars with a reflection on the challenges of inclusion. I think in a way the knowledge from Pascal, it's bringing a very interactive dimension because we can open the dialogue based on research and also based on practices. So very, very interesting discussions will come, I'm pretty sure. And on this case of inclusion in learning cities, I just would like to tell you that over half of humanity, 4.2 billion people, lives in cities. And this is predicted to grow to 5.2 billion in 2030. Cities are growing in size, partly because of their increasing attraction to people of all ages, from diverse socioeconomic and cultural, greater safety, basic services, decent work. Cities around the world are facing acute challenges in managing rapid urbanization, from ensuring adequate housing and infrastructure to supporting the well-being of growing vulnerable populations, including slums and deprived neighborhoods, to prevent endemic inequality taking root. Yet, in order to achieve this, learning opportunities in cities must be of high quality, be inclusive of the diverse backgrounds of all learners, and be offered on a continuous basis throughout life. For this to happen, learning opportunities must be really extended to all. At the city level, an increasing amount of attention has been directed towards inclusion as accessibility, or the imperative that cities develop their physical infrastructure so that persons with disabilities can access public spaces. This is an important element, of course, but this is more or less what we already know about inclusive learning in cities. I think it's still important to broaden inclusive education in formal schooling to inclusive learning in all modalities, to move from the formal system to formal, non-formal, and informal modalities, and expanding cities' responsibility for inclusion from the improvement of physical infrastructure to the cultivation of social inclusion across all spheres and spaces, meaning families, communities, workplaces, libraries, museums, digital platforms, and beyond. UNESCO defines inclusion in education as a process that helps overcome barriers that limit the presence, participation, and achievement of learners. Equity is about ensuring that there is a concern with fairness such that the needs of all learners have equal importance. Inclusion as an integral part of lifelong learning reaffirms each individual's right to education. It is understood as a process concerned with the following: learning how to live with and learn from difference, identifying the removing barriers that can be through the collation and evaluation of information from a wide variety of sources in order to plan improvements in policy and practice. And number three, to place a particular emphasis on those groups of learners who may be at risk of marginalization, exclusion, or underachievement. Equity in this context of lifelong learning suggests that system of education and institution of learning should be fair in relation to access, providing appropriate support upon entry and creative pathways to equitable learning outcomes. Fair and equitable system should reflect the nature of the population served. Inclusion in cities remain, we learn from many documents we have been working with, as an under-researched. And I think that in that sense, the webinar today intends to provide further insights to guide research and policy initiatives. Well, with no further delay, I would like to give the floor to Marie and to the panelists so we can get a good glance of what is being working at the research level, but also at the policy level areas. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Raul. Thank you for that, setting the floor for the presentations to come. So without further ado now, I'll also pass the floor to our colleague Michael Osborne, and your slides will be uploaded just about now, and you're free to go ahead whenever you wish.
Okay, thank you, Vanessa. I don't know if people can see me, but the photo was to indicate to you that there is life during COVID, especially plant life. And you might think Scotland is famous for its whiskey and other products, but also very famous for its strawberries, but you might see my picture later. Okay, so I'm speaking from Scotland, and and welcome to everybody who's joined us. It's fascinating sitting here and seeing how many people have actually joined the webinar as we proceeded. We're delighted to continue our collaboration with UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning in this field of learning cities. We've been working from Glasgow and other parts of the world, our other centres of Pascal, in this field of learning cities for something like 20 years. And if you're interested in our work, please visit our website and work with us if you so wish. So if we go on to the next slide, Vanessa. One of our principal activities, as I have said, has been in the field of learning cities. Like UNESCO, we have a network of learning cities, and within that network, we have several sub-networks which relate to specific areas of interest, and a number of cities and other organizations across the world who are members of our network. And so I'm delighted that a little later, Alexandra from Medellin will be joining us, since Medellin in Colombia has recently joined our Learning Cities network. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay, well, Raul mentioned the International Conference on Learning Cities that was held last year in Medellin. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to attend. I had other duties with colleagues in the learning cities field in Korea, some of whom are probably online today. But I did, together with Sergio Hernandez, a lot of work in advance, and we prepared a quite substantial background paper for the conference around issues of inclusion in learning cities. And some of the key concepts that you will find in that paper, which will be published in full in due course, you can see on this slide. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to talk about all of these things, but I'm going to cover some of them in a little bit more detail in subsequent slides. So let's just go on to the next slide. Well, the idea of the city as the locus for learning isn't new, and the idea of inclusion isn't new either. We can go back to Athenian times, and my colleague Norman Longworth and I have written extensively about this, has us another colleague, another two colleagues at Glasgow, Muir Houston and Catherine Lido. We've done quite a lot of historical work in this. Well, it might not have been that in Athenian times that cities were inclusive, but at least the concept of the city was, as a locus for learning, was seen to be important, and this has been quoted extensively in writing about the notion of the learning society. Now let's go on. Of course, and Raal has mentioned this already, the whole idea of lifelong learning deals with not just the formal sector, but the non-formal and informal dimension of learning, and the idea of life-wide learning. And here is a quote from the European Commission, which emphasizes the fact that learning occurs in many aspects of life. So there's both a place dimension and a time dimension when we think about learning. So moving on. One of the things that probably doesn't feature as heavily as some other aspects of inclusion is the idea of indigenous knowledge. And this is one of the things that I highlighted in the report that we did for the Medellin conference, the issue of indigenous knowledge, and that knowledge is particular to specific cultures and societies. And I was very pleased that we were able to do a case study of the city of Victoria in Canada, which has been a learning city since 1999. And there you can see some of the work that it's been doing at a citywide level that links learning with the inclusion of indigenous peoples. And I should thank the UNESCO chair in community-based learning and participation, Bud Hall, for introducing me to Lisa Helps, who's the mayor of the city of Victoria, who provided this case study for us. Now let's just move on. Equity, Raal has mentioned this as well, and the ideas here, of course, is that institutions and systems of education should reflect the place where they're based. And I've quoted in the report an example from Australia, so it's very pleasing that Melton is with us today. A long time ago in Australia, there was a well-known report called A Fair Chance for All, which related to participation in higher education, which should reflect the nature of populations. I think it's important, though, that to say that equity is a normative concept, and notions of equity and fairness do differ from country to country. And equity refers to a whole range of different dimensions: gender, race and ethnicity. And we know at the moment all around the world, equity issues in relation to Black and ethnic minority people are very high profile. Issues of age, disability, migrant and refugee status, of course, in many countries, socioeconomic class, in other countries, caste, in some countries, the people who are living in geographically remote places who don't have access to equitable arrangements in the same way that people in urban settings have. So let's just go on. Just some examples here of cases that I pulled out for that report with Sergio, of just some examples of the types of initiatives around the world that exist. And I could give you 10 times as many different examples from the various cities that are working as learning cities. The first 4 here, Hangzhou, Contagem, Suyon, and Giza, are all cities that are part of UNESCO's global network of learning cities. And you can see there examples of a focus on migrants, a focus on young people, a focus on older people, and finally, of those 4 examples, of people in slums and deprived neighborhoods. I also added in that report an example from Duhok in Iraqi Kurdistan of a very interesting initiative from one of our Pascal learning cities, provided to me by somebody I can see who is online, my good friend Kamal Katouli of the work that's being done there in relation to the psychological rehabilitation of internally displaced persons and refugees. And more recently, when I saw that UNESCO was doing a session in relation to prisoners who are, of course, excluded in very different ways, I looked into that sort of area and came up with an interesting case from Italy, from the municipality of Ferrara, about work between the city and the prison, which focuses on education. So we can find many, many examples of different types of equity responses around the world. Key issues, though, I think that we have to think about, that those groups that are socially excluded are not homogeneous. We tend to lump people into particular categories, but those categories often are very broad, and they don't reflect the fact that many individuals suffer from multiple forms of exclusion. Often we find that in cities, there are many initiatives, but these tend to be piecemeal, and there often does not tend to be integration between different service areas. So, for example, issues of transport may be the most important issue in relation to people's ability to access educational services. So I'm quite pleased that Alexandra from Medellin is here, because I know that there's been a lot of work in Medellin on improving transport infrastructure, which is going to be very important in terms of people getting to the places where they want to learn. From what I've seen, there are probably, of the groups that I'm talking about, less emphasis on three of those groups: older adults, the disabled, and prisoners. And my friend and colleague Peter Cairns in Australia, together with Denise Reganzani, are working at the moment on this area of older adults, and that is this is a very important group which tends to be left behind. There tends to be little mention of the disabled in most of the reports that I've read around learning cities, and prisoners certainly are not the focus of attention, although of course we all know that prisoners are probably the major recipients of adult education. Other work that goes on around the world focus on smart cities, and it's probably higher profile than learning cities. And in other presentations, I've said that maybe smart city initiatives are not always as smart as they think they are, because they don't mention learning. There tends to be parallel universes in relation to the use of technology, and that's something which is going to be very important in terms of inclusion. Of course, the focus today is, in some of our discussions later, will be the particular role that cities have in terms of inclusion in relation to COVID-19. And the question that we must ask ourselves is whether COVID-19 has accentuated some of these exclusions for the most disadvantaged. And coming on to my final slide, just some questions for some of you to think about. What levers can cities use to facilitate inclusion? How are the needs and demands of the various excluded groups best addressed in cities? Do we have examples of best practices of joined up service delivery to promote inclusive learning? Is inclusion enough, or do we need to change the nature of institutions? My colleague Trevor Gale distinguishes between inclusion in education and inclusive education. In other words, it's relatively easy to include more people in education. It's not so easy to change the nature of institutions and of learning to make it inclusive. Another thing which has been part of the discussion recently about the exclusion of Black and ethnic minority groups here and in the US certainly, and probably in other parts of the world. And what can we learn from the various responses around the world to COVID-19? So thank you very much. And now I pass you back to Vanessa.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for the presentation and for those points and questions, which I think will inform a little bit of the debate later on as well with the different participants. So without further ado, we'll move on to the next presentation, and then we'll be able to take some of the questions from the audience and address them to different participants. I'd like to remind everybody to use the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen if you have any questions. I saw that some people started asking questions in the chat. These get really lost right away, more or less because the chat is flooded by people just speaking with each other, which is what we want, but we would welcome questions in the Q&A so that we can then take them during the discussion portion of today's webinar. So we'll now move on to our colleague Alexandra Aguiledo-Ruiz. Welcome, and thank you for being here. I'm going to put your slide up in just a second, and the floor is yours. I think I can see you. I can't quite hear you yet. Let me just unmute you. There, now we can hear you.
Good morning from Medellin. My name is Alexandra. I will be speaking Spanish with interpreting.
First, I would like to thank UNESCO and the Institute for Lifelong Learning, as well as the Pascal Learning Cities Network for this invitation. For us, education is a huge commitment. We are convinced that social transformation has a fundamental core, education, and our city is a living proof of that. I also want to recognize Mike and Raul, who have become great partners of our city and with whom we have been working to generate learning networks that supplement our day-to-day work. I would also like to recognize the learning cities of Mantes-la-Jolie, France, and Melton City, Australia, from which we will most certainly learn practices in inclusive education that will supplement our vision. Next slide, please. To begin this presentation, the previous one, to begin the presentation, I want to talk a little bit about our city. So I will start with a brief recent context to understand the important role that education has played, and I will conclude by talking about some of the lines in educational inclusion in which we work. Medellin is a Colombian municipality, capital of the department of Antioquia. It is the second most populous city in the country. The municipality is territorially organized in 6 geographical areas, which are made up of 16 communes and 5 townships. With a population of 2.5 million inhabitants, Medellin has a territorial extension of 375 kilometers square, where 73% of the territory correspond to the rural area and the remaining 27% to the urban area. Well, after having been, at the end of the last century, one of the most dangerous cities in the world due to drug trafficking, Medellin has managed to transform itself drastically and become a proactive, creative, and active city. Between the years 1983 and 1994, Medellin suffered around 46 million violent deaths. After this panorama of historical violence, occurred a process of cultural transformation based on investment in education and the continuity of public policies in the educational system in the 21st century. Thus, it is important to note that the work on education had a great impact socially and culturally on our city. Medellin is no longer on the list of the most violent cities in the world. It is now recognized for its innovation and transformation, made possible by the commitment of local authorities, different stakeholders on education and culture. Between 2010 and 2018, the incidence of monetary poverty in Medellin went down from 22% to 12%, and the incidence of extreme monetary poverty also went down in the same period from 5% to 3%. Additionally, during the same period, the Gini coefficient, which measures the degree of inequality in income distribution, went down from 0.55 in 2010 to 0.508 in 2018. Next slide, please. Thanks. For the administration of the current mayor, Daniel Quintero, continuity of educational policies remains a key factor for the social transformation of the city. This is proven in an increase of nearly 18% of educational budget during the period 2020-2023. That in comparison to the previous administration. In this way, Medellin continues believing in social recovery, which requires, among other things, the integration of disadvantaged groups to guarantee equity and their access to quality education. The committed work of Medellin around sustainable development goals guarantees the inclusion of groups of concerns and empowers them with the required tools for the transformation of their environments in order to build the future of our city. Our commitment to a future Medellin projected in the RESET development project is based upon the fourth industrial revolution for economic development, which is going to rely on our young talent, and also the generation of sustainable environments and the care of them to set up an eco-city. Faced with this, education and culture are cornerstones of the current administration project. So one goal is to guarantee access, permanence, and quality of education for everyone. Next slide, please. As you can see in this slide, the commitment to a transformation of education and culture requires not only the commitment to a diverse and inclusive education, but also its strengthening in order to foster the consolidation of Medellin as a center of the fourth industrial revolution, the development of an eco-city, and the continuing social recovery. Therefore, some programs that deal with disadvantaged groups have been promoted, such as programs for abandoned children, minorities, victims of the armed conflict, and students in overage condition. And for instance, as Mike mentioned before, with a great infrastructure that connects all the city. Now, I will highlight some actions undertaken with some of these groups. Next slide, please. Children with special needs. In Medellin, we have around 10,000 students with special needs. For that reason, programs are undertaken to guarantee their access and permanence for early childhood education through upper secondary education and their possible work placement. Our commitment to a universal design for learning is based on the perspective of inclusion education. Here, we design individual plans for children with special needs to guarantee their right to education. Next. Children with special healthcare needs. Currently, there are in our city about 2,000 children under the age of 18 with the characteristics established by law to be in this group. You can see it in the slide. Those students are from levels starting at initial, preschool, basic, and middle education. Bearing this in mind, one of the key points to seek coverage and permanence in education systems of our children with special healthcare needs begins with the articulation of educational institutions of the municipality and hospitals. Therefore, we differentiate those children who get support and curricular flexibility with the purpose of helping them and the educational institution from an academic, pedagogical, and emotional perspective. Next, please. Students in need of international protection. Currently in Medellin, we have around 25,000 children and adolescents to whom we guarantee access, permanence, and quality education, regardless of their nationality or immigration status. For this group of students, we provide support and curricular flexibility with the purpose of strengthening meaningful learning. Likewise, we offer assistance not only to them, but also to their educational institutions, since we understand the situation and the social and psychological context in which these children and young people find themselves. Our mission as a learning city is to guarantee full coverage and access to the educational system and permanence to generate protective school environments for this population. Next slide, please. SER plus STEM. As I mentioned before, some of the key aspects of our vision of our future Medellin is that it consolidates itself as a center of the fourth industrial revolution and as a benchmark for sustainability. To achieve this, the strengthening of the STEM approach in education is an important commitment which has been conceived with a high humanistic component that was called Being plus STEM, or SER plus STEM. Within this approach, inclusion plays an important role. In that sense, we have a program that targets female students in order to motivate them and encourage their participation in projects and professions related to the areas of science, technology, mathematics, and engineering. All of this with a high humanistic component. Well, the idea here is to reduce the gender gap in this industry and to empower women to excel in technology careers. For this vision, the strategy wants to include female students from basic and technical secondary education with a perspective of equity and inclusion in order to increase their participation in areas that are dominated by men in Colombia. SER plus STEM women facilitates and strengthens the participation of this group, and here we highlight their female potential through the implementation of projects where they can develop creativity, technical skills, leadership, critical thinking, problem solving, teamwork, collaboration, and so on. There are some of the programs in which we guarantee access, permanence, and quality in education for all. This is a continuous city effort in which we have committed ourselves from the cultural resistance to violence and to project ourselves towards a vision of the future we want to achieve through education. We want to build a future of Medellin not only from within, but also with the cooperation of different stakeholders and learning networks, including all of you. That's why we would like to invite you to visit Medellin. We are eager to see you here once we have overcome this pandemic we are living through. So you can walk our streets and learn firsthand about the social and cultural transformation that we have led through education. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alexandra, for that comprehensive presentation and all the different examples. We've gotten a few questions already. Like I said, please keep asking and we'll be drawing from the Q&A where you're asking your questions during the discussion after everybody's presentation. So we'll keep moving on to our next presentation by Aminata. Aminata, I will put up your presentation and feel free to get started when you're ready. I think you should be able to see the screen very soon, and I'll try to make sure it's full screen. Can you see it?
Yeah, I can see it. Okay, thank you, Marie. So good afternoon, everybody. So first of all, I would like to apologize to the mayor of Mantes-la-Jolie, Mr. Raphaël Cognier, which cannot attend to the webinar today. And then I would like to thank UIL and Pascal Institute for the organization of this new webinar and to invite the city of Mantes-la-Jolie to participate. I also would like to thank the colleague from Medellin and Melton. And to start, I just would like to say that we consider in Mantes-la-Jolie that the crisis with the context of COVID-19 is an opportunity to highlight strong links between inclusion issues and all the inequalities which were already existing, but which were revealed during the crisis. It's that's why the presentation is quite focused on COVID-19 and inclusion. We can go to the next slide, please. So just the general context of COVID-19 in France. Next, please. We can see in this slide that the region of Mantes-la-Jolie was really impacted by COVID. We are in the big red area, and we were like really impacted and in a lockdown, a total lockdown during 2 months. Next. Just if we can go before the first slide with yes, this one. Just to make a short presentation of Mantes-la-Jolie, which is located in the suburb of Paris in France. We are a very multicultural city, in which we have several nationalities, and we are in the department of Les Yvelines. We are a pretty small city in the GNLC network with 55,000 inhabitants. We can go next, please. Next. We would like to share with you the importance of local level, considering inclusion and with the highlight of the crisis of COVID-19. Next, please. So Mantes-la-Jolie is a member of Learning City since 2017. It's the second French city to have been admitted to the network. And we really care about exchange with other cities. It's that why we have really regular meeting with other French cities which are in the network. Clermont-Ferrand, Évry-Courcouronnes, and Montpellier. Mantes-la-Jolie is working on the cluster inclusion and equity since Medellin conferences. And we are working on it with Melton and Wuhan. We can go next, please. The project of Learning City in Mantes-la-Jolie is based on a strong political commitment. Raphaël Cognier is the mayor. He was being re-elected for a 6 years mandate in March 2020. And the project is also supported by Pierre Bédier, which is the president of the Department and Council. Mr. Amadou Daf is vice-mayor, and he was a representative of the city during the conference of Medellin. The main challenges of inclusion in Mantes-la-Jolie are really important because Mantes-la-Jolie is a very heterogeneous city, which is, we can see this heterogeneity with some indicator. The city of Mantes-la-Jolie is composed by 3 areas which are really different, even in an architectural way. And half of the inhabitants of Mantes-la-Jolie are living in underprivileged area, which is one neighbor in particular, which is called Le Val-Forêt. 32% of the inhabitants are living under the poverty rate. We are one of the poorer cities in the region of Paris. Also considering the youth, which are particularly vulnerable, we have 27% of children under 11 which are in this situation, and 24 needs. Next, please. So this is a map of Mantes-la-Jolie, in which one you can see all the city, the 3 neighborhoods, and In green, it's the historical center. In yellow, in the middle, a neighborhood which is most composed of individual house and the neighbor or le Val-Fouré, which is a disadvantaged area. Next, please. As I said, the crisis of the COVID was an opportunity to highlight all this vulnerability and to take this concept of inclusion to try to address these challenges. So during the period of lockdown, the city had created several new services in very few days. For all the people, we have created a health center special for COVID-19, and we had organized a free testing campaign. For vulnerable peoples, we had made also project dedicated and for elderly people and youth. Next, please. So we had created a center special for help the hospital and to have not too many people there. And 21 patients have been followed. And the project is born thanks to a partnership between the hospital, the city, and the regional agency of health. Next, please. The city prepared the after lockdown with two main actions, mass distribution and the free tasting campaign. So all the families of Mantes-la-Jolie have received two masks before the end of the lockdown. And the free tasting campaign was organized on the local market, which is really full. 357 people were tested and only 3 people were positive. So it was a good indicator to start the opening of the activity and the school. We also can underline an initiative for social distancing. One local association made this initiative, of fabrication of masks, which goals is to fight against COVID-19. This is an association composed by inhabitants of the neighbor of the Le Val-Fouré, and each week they made 160 masks for all the inhabitants of the city. Next, please. Here we can see the mayor of the city and the member of the association and the worker in the mask manufactory. Next, please. The project is also a project of job creation. 16 people are working there for 5 months, and all the material are buy in the local market. And the average of the worker are women, so we can here see the link with inclusion and the volunteer to address the challenge of the vulnerable people. Next, please.
Aminata, il reste juste only 1 minute left.
Okay, thank you. We also had an attention to elderly people. And during the lockdown, we created a platform special for them to follow up and to have a special contact every day and to bear a psychological support. Next, please. The youth people are also in our preoccupation. We have a municipal services dedicated, and during the lockdown, we give to them 2,050 computer to help them to continue the school at home. Next, please. The response was also economical because Mantes-la-Jolie is a city where really the underprivileged in the economical area also, and the mayor decided to help all the shops which were closed during the lockdown with the financial support. Next, please. To conclude, we really care about keep the Medellin works and the concept of inclusion to address some challenges which were really highlighted during the crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Aminata. Thank you very much for your remarks and for the very comprehensive description of the different initiatives that you've undertaken at the city of Mantes-la-Jolie. We'll have some questions later. A lot have come through. I'd like to invite everybody to keep asking questions through the Q&A. We'll be taking those after the last presentation. So last but not least, I'd like to invite our colleague from Melton, Cassandra, to begin her presentation. Cassandra, I'll just be uploading your slides, and you can start whenever you're ready.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to say thank you for having me into UNESCO and Pascal and the International Network of Learning Cities. It's great to be here speaking about inclusion on behalf of Learning Cities. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I live and work, and to recognise the 60,000 plus years of knowledge that are shared by their elders, past, present and emerging. Next slide, please. The city of Melton is located about 30 kilometres west of the Melbourne CBD. Melbourne is the capital of the state of Victoria. Melton is one of the fastest growing municipalities in Australia, and it has gone from a small rural town to a bustling hub of activity over the last 20 or so years. In our latest Bureau of Statistics results from 2016, we're seeing emerging ancestry groups from Indian and Filipino backgrounds. And between 2011 and 2016, we've seen an 11% increase in residents from non-English speaking backgrounds, which makes up approximately 1/3 of all residents of the city of Melton. Next slide, please. One of the ways we've looked at establishing learning in the city of Melton is to bring in key stakeholders to form a learning board. The Community Learning Board has been active for the past 22 years, and it's made up of groups of internal and external stakeholders, and is working towards making Melton a smart city where everyone can meet their individual potential. Part of the role of the board is to help to facilitate learning opportunities, not just within the normal four walls of the classroom, but more on the context of social well-being and advancement. Next slide, please. Some of the ways we look to support equity and inclusion in the city of Melton is by providing no-cost or low-cost opportunities and activities within our community hubs and other venues. We try to host affordable activities for particular demographics who may be facing isolation. And one of our most successful programs has actually been aimed at the recent arrival of Indian women who have faced some social isolation. We've formed a Bollywood mothers dance group, which has actually helped the women go from just dancing to supporting each other and providing job skill training and counselling for life in a new country. Next, please. How do we find out what the community needs? In order to address community needs and interests, we do a whole range of formal and informal feedback processes and act on their results, modifying programs accordingly. So this is done through a program logic and evaluation system. Our community activation and learning officers who work in our hubs around the city of Melton write logics prior to organising sessions And these logics provide statistical community data justifying the need for that program in that location. And the program logic also helps to identify short and long-term outcomes we hope to achieve by the facilitation of the program. Some examples of this might simply be to reduce isolation within the community. Others might be pre-training for job skill practices. Others might simply be to build interpersonal skills. Next slide, please. One way we've been able to reach our very diverse community is by creating the Melton Learning Directory. This website was launched in 2017 and it's seen big changes during COVID. It's gone from simply being a directory of activities where people can log on and sign up for all sorts of classes and activities to actually moving classes online and classes that have been pre-recorded and ran through our Melton Learning Directory YouTube channel. Our officers have noticed through this that we are seeing engagement from new members of the community that we have not engaged with face-to-face before. Next slide, please. Our showcase event for lifelong learning is our Learning Festival, which was established in 2018, and it's our benchmark celebration. The principle of the festival is to provide life-wide, life-deep and lifelong learning opportunities. All the programs within the festival are free, enabling us to remove socioeconomic barriers for participation. COVID has been a little bit of a rethink for the format of this year's festival, and we are currently investigating opportunities to take classes online via pre-recorded videos and also live stream. Next slide, please. Another key addition to why we find benefit in running the Melton Lifelong Learning Festival in the City of Melton is it helps to promote the benefits of ongoing learning for everyone. It builds awareness of the opportunities we have for learning in the City of Melton, and it promotes our city as a global learning city. We also look to take the idea of learning as something that only children do in the classroom away and really build on the fact that learning is fun, it's a social activity, and it can make life more fulfilling and more enjoyable. Next, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. Here's some statistics from our festival from last year. We've realised that with the festival, we've had a number of people who are interested in learning about food and nutrition, and they tend to come along to these classes. They book out very quickly, and this tends to have a lot to do with some of the health outcomes in our city. We're working very hard to build a healthy city of Melton, and participants are very interested in not only nutrition, but in cuisines and learning about the other cultures within the city around the world. So it's interesting to see that interconnection of our community members learning through food. Next, please. Moving forward, and this is also or the need for it's been amplified because of COVID. We've noticed a huge divide between digital access and digital literacy. So we are targeting 200 seniors and people from non-English speaking backgrounds to have classes established around digital literacy. The focus will be on topics like, but not limited to, social media, editing photos, setting up email accounts, using government services which are continually developing online, using the internet, and of course online safety, which is a huge concern for our elderly community. Next slide, please. Melton City is in the process of developing a 10-year City of Learning strategy. As part of that strategy, we are looking to encourage and enable learners from all ages to actively engage in lifelong learning, developing their skills both professionally and personally. We look to promote and support and engage participation in civic life through the groups that traditionally have difficulty in being heard and participating. Part of this has also come through via our new program that we're launching, Active and Engaged Seniors project, in which we're working with a range of seniors and organisations to access the need and aspiration of our seniors to help make connections via our programming services. The way we've addressed this is we've found that many seniors continually do programs which they are familiar with. So we're taking it to them. We're actively going and working with the seniors to find out what else they might be interested in doing and how we can tailor that to fit their individual needs. Next slide, please. Our strategic goals, you can see, range from providing inclusive and accessible learning opportunities to enable individuals' empowerment and to build the social cohesion, which I already spoke about, and to encourage and support all people embracing the concept of learning to earn and providing them with real-world experiences. So what we're looking to do is improve the overall education and work skills of our community through our programs to enable them to get jobs that might have been out of reach for them previously. Overall, we look to foster inclusion where diversity is valued. And we think that our differences are our strengths, and we look to continue working forward and taking on the challenges that COVID has brought to us in new light, looking at different ways to deliver to what we've done previously. We're hoping to engage with close to 400 seniors and people from other languages within the next 12 months to bring them up to speed with digital literacy programs and help them join some of the other members of our community online. I want to thank you for having me today, and thanks to all our presenters for their participation. You can see our contact details here if you'd like to contact us or ask any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Cassandra. Thank you. I'll just leave that for another 10 seconds. There's quite a few questions that have come up on the chat or on the Q&A, I should say, actually. I'm just going through them to see if there are questions that could apply to all of our speakers. A lot of the questions apply or are being asked to some speakers. So let's start. There's quite a long one. I think this one will give the opportunity for all participants to weigh in. I'll just read it to everybody. The COVID pandemic has made inequalities more visible. It has also helped to highlight the value of intergenerational learning, with parents and grandparents assisting with the education of their children during the lockdown. While there have been numerous observations about the digital and internet inequities, there has been less said about the valuable contribution of adult literacy to this intergenerational learning. How can we more effectively use the concept of learning cities to help highlight and sustain the awareness of the value of adult learning that has been made visible by COVID-19? So I'd like to maybe open the floor and start with our first speaker, Mike Osborne, to give us some remarks on that particular question, and then we can move through our different speakers for today in answering or at least addressing that question, given that the question is quite broad.
Well, that's a very good question from my good friend and fellow Pascal director in Melbourne, Robbie Guevara. He makes some very good points there. And I mean, one of the positive aspects of COVID-19, if there are any positive aspects, is the way in which different generations have been working with each other. And I can see that, for example, in our own students at the University of Glasgow, particularly in the community development field, and the whole range of initiatives they've been involved in working with older generations and people who are excluded in various ways. Robbie also talks about digital and internet inequities, and of course that's incredibly important. Older people have not been able to access certain services because of the concentration of these services moving even more so to online forms, And you know, there are also issues of migrant populations finding it more difficult to understand the COVID-19 message because governments have not put into place systems whereby they whereby the material that's been produced has been translated into other languages. So the learning city concept, how can it help highlight and sustain the awareness of adult learning? Well, I think, you know, the basic principle behind certainly one strand of work within learning cities is the way in which different parts of the education system work together, but more than that, about the way in which all the services that are being offered by cities work more closely with each other. And there's never been a time when it's been more important for there to be joined up service delivery that doesn't narrow what we do just to the education sector. And so it is about bringing together the different sectors that cross into cultural sectors, environmental sectors, social services sectors, and it is about learning. And Robbie talks about adult learning. It's about putting learning at the heart of all those services. I mean, for me, there are huge numbers of urban initiatives. There's lots of adjectives in front of the word city around the world. The one that's most important is learning. And if we don't create an infrastructure where all parts of the city see themselves as offering learning around the services that they offer, we're failing. And we should be even more aware of that now than any time.
Thank you, Mike. I think we'll also hear from Raul Valdez from the GNLC and UIL more generally to give us that perspective on that particular topic.
Thank you, Marie. I would like to respond to that one because if we can see that almost all discussions from organizations are moving very much into the formal system, as it's a quite intensive task to restructure the formal system and to bring back the children and the youth population into the formal system. But there's a strange paradox that we can see during COVID-19, that a lot of non-formal and informal learning has been promoted quite a lot, because in the intention to change behavior of all citizens, what has been shown quite impact is precisely the non-formal and informal modalities. And we can see, for example, at the level of families, with learning families, that it's not just an issue related to children learning at home what they should learn at school, but it's a learning process. And I will bring what Paulo Freire used to say, we all learn, we all teach. And that's what we're facing in today's world. So for me, the relevance of adult education is quite clear, and there is no way, in my own opinion, to change behavior of citizens if we don't push on that direction, to address directly to youth and adults, to reinforce this intergenerational learning, it's true, to learn skills, but also to learn how to cope with life, how to take care of ourselves, to take care of the others, to take care of the planet. So I think in many ways, the message for adult education is quite clear. And of course, as one of the presenters mentioned, there are many challenges, but there are also many opportunities to bring this in a very strong message. Just to say, it's not a promotion issue, but UIL is already working on an issue note on this particular topic that I think will bring more ideas that will highlight the importance of this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Raul. Thank you for that. And Also, the issue note, just to make a point to say that the issue note highlights the importance of the issue, but not only that, the interconnectedness of the different sectors and what non-formal and formal learning really bring to the table, especially in the context of COVID-19 and post-COVID-19, in terms of what does it mean to learn in this context, and what can cities do to foster learning initiatives. So we'll move on to a question that has come up in past webinars as well, quite a bit. And given that we have cities with different groups of people living both in cities but also outside of cities and in rural, remote areas with potentially a different access to education, one of the questions comes to us with asking how will many issues covered under inclusion include communities who live in rural and or remote areas? Do the cities with us today have examples on how they are linking inclusion policies to those specific areas? Maybe we can start with Medellin on that. Alexandra.
Okay.
Well, for connectivity in townships or programs directly with rural areas that we have here, we have like what we call the program Protected Environments. And with that program, we ensure that all children are learning regardless like their internet connection. So for that, we provide, for instance, like the curriculum activities in paper, or even we have TV programs, radio, or here is so popular the use of WhatsApp. So we send them message because they have like, for instance, like their cell phone. So it's easy for them to reach that information there. So even though they're like, we are all in lockdown and they're not connected, we reach them and make sure that they continue learning.
Thank you. Thank you. I just want to make sure there's nothing else coming. Okay, so maybe Cassandra, if you'd like to address that particular question of inclusion policies being carried out to rural areas or remote areas, if you're able to comment on that. You're back.
Hi. My city doesn't really include remote or rural areas per se, but we have seen a national scheme to increase internet access at the moment across the country with the national broadband network being rolled out. So that's one of the ways they're looking to increase participation.
Thank you. Aminata, if you wish to comment on this, and then maybe we can hear also from Michael if there are different initiatives being carried out in Scotland or in the UK more generally, if you know of some. Aminata?
Yes, in Mantes-la-Jolie, we don't have this issue with rural area because we are an urban city. But what we can underline is that some family didn't have the electronic equipment. So we really maintain the human link to know with which means they could follow the scholarship and the school for the children. So it was with the paper, with all the means to permits them to follow the school.
Thank you, Aminata. Mike, if you wish to comment on that.
I would only say that, and I see this question came from a number of people, including Leonie, who is running our remote and rural network from Australia. I'd comment in saying that so many of the initiatives around learning cities have focused on larger cities, and of course Mantes-la-Jolie is an exception. And we've recognized the fact that there are many smaller places, or often, as we say in the UK, left behind places that we must focus more on. So I think this is a very important issue, and certainly from the Pascal perspective, is going to be something that we're going to put considerable efforts in the future. looking at some of those communities. So for instance, in Australia, Leonie is focusing on those smaller communities that have suffered multiply, for instance, from the bushfires and so on. Here in the UK, we have many places which are economically very deprived that we would look at. Also in Pascal, we have a small city in Belarus, Korma, in the Chernobyl area. And you can imagine the sorts of issues that they have suffered in the past from environmental degradation. So these are some of the places that we're trying to look at, and trying to look at the range of issues that they can address through taking a learning city approach.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. We'll move on to maybe two more very practical questions that I think participants can answer specifically, just so we get a sense of what the initiatives are and how they work. So for Medellin, one question comes, how did you reach families with disabled children during the lockdown? So practically speaking, I think participants are interested in knowing how you were able to do that.
Yeah.
Well, to answer that question is even like the same answer we have in a moment, because it's like the same program with protective environments. We reach them with different activities. We reach them and make sure that they are continue learning. And for us, it's super important also for them to have like with psychological support, because they're struggling even more with this kind of situation. So we make sure that all their needs, or their basic needs, are covered. And also like the psychological aspect, for instance, we make sure that they are like eating well, they are like protected, and they're feeling well.
Thank you. Another practical question. Do participants, speakers today, have examples to share of standout activities and inclusive practices or policies related to the older generations? And what kind of challenges were you faced with maybe in implementing or carrying these specific initiatives or activities out? Maybe we can start with Cassandra on this, if you have specific initiatives, standout activities related to older generations.
Yeah, so we actually have an active and engaged seniors program that we're starting out to reach, further reach out to seniors. But at the moment, our active seniors officer has been providing a whole heap of different activities and check-ins to help isolated seniors during the COVID-19 outbreak. We've even had lawn concerts where we've had local performers go to elderly people's homes and perform songs on their front lawn to just as a way of connecting. Some of our programs that we see seniors really engaged in are dancing. A lot of seniors want to keep active, so we have seniors yoga. We also have a lot of tech classes and are developing that at the moment, because we've noticed that there's a huge generation of seniors now who obviously missed the technology earlier on in their life, but it is the only way that they can engage with their younger family members, like their grandchildren. So they're very keen to learn how to FaceTime and Zoom and those sorts of things. So I would say at the moment, our big programs for seniors would be anything that's activity-based from an exercise point of view. So we have specific seniors yoga and movement classes, dancing, and technology. As far as engaging with the seniors, we've been able to use our network of about 27 seniors societies and groups. Some of these are just age-based, others are by nationality, like we have the Macedonian seniors group and the Maltese seniors group, and being able to go and talk to them in their own safe spot where they feel connected together and just ask the question, what else do you want to know? What else do you want to learn about? And there's been some really interesting things that have come from that, but certainly without a doubt, technology has been the big one there.
Thank you. Maybe if we can hear from Aminata on that question, and then Medellin, and maybe circle back to Mike also if there.
Yes, thank you, Marie. We are in Mantes-la-Jolie a municipal service dedicated to senior, and to be honest, the activity is more focused on maintaining social link, social life for senior, and we organize several activities such as Christmas dinner or thing like really social life. But we have also one workshop for learn how to use digital tools to help them to be more autonomous to use the digital tools.
Thank you, Aminata. Alexandra?
Here in our municipality, we have like a specifically Secretary of Social Inclusion and Family that they guarantee their access to programs especially designed for these elderly people. We also make sure that they are safe and they are doing well during this time because it's hard for all the city, but also they are maybe in hard situations. So as well as with children, we make sure that they are having food, they're having like a safe environment also for them.
Thank you. Mike, if you'd like to give a few remarks on that as well.
Well, just with my University of Glasgow hat on, I think on this occasion, there's some very interesting work going on from our Centre for Open Studies, and I think which will be promoted by UNESCO as a case study in due course, and that includes a whole range of online provision for adults that focuses on, in the liberal adult education area, I suppose. But one of the interesting things I think that you and UNESCO have picked up is a series of presentations on art in the time of crisis. But that's just one example of a whole range of learning opportunities that have been converted into online form towards the general population in Glasgow and beyond.
Thank you.
And I'm sure other universities with that tradition of offering adult education in the liberal adult education form will be doing similar things.
Thank you for that. So I just want to say, I'll ask one more question that I think everybody will be able to speak to, but I also just want to highlight one of the comments from one of our participants who's excited to see Melton's new engagement through the YouTube channel and their plans for a new festival after COVID-19. This comes from Siobhan McCarthy, coordinators of the Irish Network of Learning Cities. They're in the process of reimagining their own festival. I just want to point out that the different learning festivals that are happening in the different learning cities are all being reimagined. So it's really great to see that there's maybe some coordination or possibility of just seeing how others are doing and maybe learning from the different strategies that are being developed by the cities today. There's a question that was following from Raoul's comment on how can we highlight the learning that is perceived as less important because it is not formal? For example, all the learning that has happened in homes around perhaps cooking and cleaning, but also links to traditional games, songs, and other cultural practices, and also perhaps all the learning that's happened at an intergenerational level, like we discussed earlier. I think maybe I'll let Raoul speak to that just a little bit, and then we can hear if there have been strategies at the city level developed to recognize or to highlight within schools or outside how important the learning that has taken place during this particular time will be then included in the learning in the formal sector. Raoul, if you'd like to address that question briefly, and then we can hear from our other participants as well.
Just very fast. Thank you, Marie. I think that the crisis has put evidence of all those issues that have not been working so well, and it brings us like the chance or opportunity to ask about the curricula, to ask about the what people is learning, and brings the chance to reconsider what already presenters were mentioning, the importance of start talking about education and health, health and sustainable development, and to really link all these issues to have a more comprehensive understanding of the people, and not just focusing on one specific things related to the world of work or to specific skills. I think this brings us the big chance to understanding the world in a different way. So I would really suggest very much to continue moving on these dialogues between the different sectors and different units. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe Mike, if you'd like to address that point.
Yeah, I mean, I think essentially I agree with everything that Raul has said there. There's so much we can learn from what's been going on recently, but to pick up on another point that Robbie made, the adult learning is fairly invisible in this crisis, and you know the focus really has been on the formal sector, on schools and education at university level, and us getting back to a new normal. And I can see that across a whole range of different institutions. And of course, we're going to be in a period when there are going to be less resources. So those resources which do exist are potentially much more likely to be dedicated in higher proportions to the formal sector. So this is why voices like ours, and especially UIL, are so important to ensure that those around the world who are in charge of resources dedicated towards education don't retreat back into focusing on an even narrower area of concern.
Thank you, Mike. Maybe Cassandra, if you'd like to comment, if there's been some efforts or strategy or ideas discussed at the city level on highlighting the type of learning that's taken place during the pandemic, non-formal and formal learning.
Sorry.
Well,
I think.
No, go ahead.
You go ahead, Cassandra, and then we'll move to Medellin.
Oh, sorry.
No.
Sorry. I think that what we've seen is we're always trying to encourage informal learning to build beyond the four walls of a classroom, just to build capable global citizens within our society. So from our point of view, we've just taken a lot of what we're already trying to do in a face-to-face setting and move it online. From the point of view of from what I've seen of Victorian formal education, a lot of teachers have been addressing parents with messages such as, don't forget cooking is maths, don't forget gardening is science. So whilst it might not be formally recognised, there is that understanding that informal learning does have a benefit for all generations within the community.
Thank you for that, Cassandra. And Alexandra?
Yes, for us, non-formal education is really important, even though like during this pandemic, because it reached around 1 million people and from like 16 years old. And for us, it is important because it's this kind of technical education or training allow that people to work. So right now we're about to open new institutions. We know that will take time to recover and get back. But right now, this non-formal education is virtual. So we are trying to adapt this kind of education because for us, it's like, as we say, is really important.
Thank you. Aminata, if you would like to remark on this, and then...
Yes, thank you, Marie. I would like to talk about the educative summer, which is really born of after the crisis, and the volunteers to really underline the importance to make partnership with the school of the city to construct a program of formal learning program, activities organized in the school, but also non-formal activities with municipal services, local association such as theater, etc. So it will be a mix of non-formal and formal activities during all the summer for under 25 years.
Thank you, Aminata. Unfortunately, we're not able to answer all the questions that have come today in the chat, and that's a bit sad given that some of them are really interesting. Most of them are really interesting, and I think all of our participants would have appreciated to be given the chance to answer some of them. I'd like to invite participants who wish to answer them or type answers individually. I'm speaking to the speakers today. Please go ahead, Mike. You've been very active at responding to some of the questions, which is very helpful. So if some of the questions that are directly addressed to the speakers here today could be answered by those speakers, that would be great. And I think with that, I'm going to give the floor now to my colleague, Raul Valdez-Cotera, for some closing remarks before we close off the webinar.
Thank you, Maria. I think it was a very, very interesting session. It was a dialogue that we foreseen. And I think we have a lot more to say. It's a pity that 1 hour and a half, it's never enough. I really think that many important topics came into the discussion. And I like very much what Melton was suggesting when they asked, what else do you want to know? What else do you want to learn? And I think this is a very important topic, because usually we see governments sometimes just trying to guess what learners are looking for. And what we can see sometimes is, and when we saw the different in the different examples, that we're trying to improve policies that should be oriented to and targeting one specific group, and not thinking really in what Mike was suggesting as inclusive education policies that really will be thinking already in the inclusive and equitable perspective. I think that also the crisis in the pandemic is giving us a chance to reinforce those strategies that have been working in the past. And I think it was very good, this mention to the festivals, because in a way has been a very strong strategy to include all the voices. I think we need to find ways how to continue the festivals in this pandemic time, because it's not that easy, and a lot of them has been postponed. We also could see that the technological discussion, it's sometimes dividing and enlarging the gap with the excluded population. And I think we need to find ways of continue promoting education in the distance, considering all those vulnerable groups. I think that also a last component that I would like to raise is the relevance of the dialogue between cities and the rural areas. I think it's something also to take very much into account, and even understanding that the pandemic was more reflected in the cities. I think many initiatives needs to be taken also from the city in order to respond to the needs of the rural areas. I would like just to finish mentioning the Medellin statement, and there is a sentence that I would like to, just let me find that one. It says, in the outcome document of the Medellin Manifesto, it states, at the heart of these challenges and opportunities lies sustainable development, which calls on us to ensure that our cities' infrastructures, local economies, cultures, and social spaces develop in a way that empowers individuals and communities and respects the planet, applying a human rights-based approach and principles of democratic citizenship. It's a very powerful document. I would suggest you to take a look again 8 months later. Thank you very much to all.
Thank you so much, Raul, and thank you to all the participants for the presentations today. Really interesting and very engaging, and really great to hear that there are strategies being developed to respond in different ways to the issues posed by those challenges, especially in the context of learning festivals, that there's new solutions being developed and new ways to be inclusive in this time. So the slides that you all saw today will be uploaded to the UIL website, along with a summary of the webinar. We've done this also for all of our past webinars, our GNLC webinars, where we again welcome you to go visit our webpage if you'd like to either watch the webinars or read about them. The next webinar with Pascal Observatory will take place on July 8th, this time on the topic of the challenge of measuring, planning, and evaluation in learning cities. We'll be discussing approaches to educational planning, benchmarking, and monitoring learning cities' performance. We've seen a few questions around the topic of indicators, and this is very much a topic that came through during the 4th International Conference in Medellin. Very much a topic of discussion also in terms of the development of data indicators at the city level, how we start developing data indicators for some of the goals set by the learning cities and also the SDGs. How are these then implemented within a city? So we'll be hearing from cities that are part of the GNLC cluster on educational planning, monitoring, and evaluation. We'll also have participation from the UNESCO International Institute for Educational Planning, IAP, which will be our technical partner, and we'll be hearing from examples of cities through the Pascal Observatory and their network. So with that, I'd like to welcome everybody to join the